Hello, and welcome to our viewers for this Cobb Democrats virtual town hall featuring Georgia House District 42. I'm Jacqueline Bedadapour, the chair of the Cobb County Democratic Committee. Assisting me tonight is Cobb Democrats First Vice Chair Matt Southwell. We're speaking tonight with two Democratic candidates running in Georgia House District 42, Teri Anulewicz and Asher Nuckolls. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Georgia House District 42 covers parts of Smyrna and Marietta. Teri Anulewicz is the current incumbent, and she is being challenged by Asher Nuckolls in the June 9th Democratic primary. We are going to start with 2-minute opening statements, followed by questions with a 90-second response time, 45-second rebuttals if a candidate or a candidate's position is called out by the opposing candidate, and then 2-minute closing statements. Matt Southwell will be keeping the time. Let's start with Teri Anulewicz. Teri, you have 2 minutes to introduce yourself to voters.
Thanks, Jackie. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the Cobb Democrats for hosting tonight. I am Teri Anulewicz. I represent House District 42. This includes parts of Smyrna and Marietta and the Fair Oaks community. Prior to being elected to the General Assembly, I spent a decade serving on the Smyrna City Council representing Ward 3. I served as Smyrna's mayor pro tem from 2016 until the time I ran for the State House in 2017. I've kept a steady focus on protecting the livelihoods of working families in Cobb County during my time in the General Assembly. I'll continue to keep the needs of this community at the forefront of any legislative efforts in the future. I have a track record of responsive and accessible constituent services. I'm able to effectively and efficiently assist constituents with any issues they might have. With my experience in state and local government, I have a deep understanding of the challenges our district has faced, and I'm committed to continuing to do this in a smart, level-headed way. I'll continue to collaborate with my Democratic colleagues in the House and Senate, and while I also continue to work with my GOP colleagues to help pass critical legislation, because the reality is that until we flip the House in Georgia, we've got to work with the other side, too. I'll continue at the same time to fight laws and policies that are discriminatory and that hurt women, children, families, and workers in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you, Teri. Asher, you have 2 minutes.
So I'm Asher Nuckolls. I'm running for District 42. I used to be a teacher, but now I'm a data scientist. I was asked to run by members of the LGBTQ and the disabled community because they felt like they weren't really because this district makes the median income is 20% less than the rest of Georgia, and they really need someone to fight for them on issues like housing and healthcare and making sure everyone has good paying jobs. And it's just not some, and to fight the two-party system, we really don't have much choice here in Georgia, and I really want to open it up so that there can be more political voices, people can have more access to their politicians, that we can just have a more open and transparent process that will work better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Asher. So we'll start with question and answer. Asher, you'll answer what you're up for the first response to the first question. The 2020 session started with Kemp initially proposing a 4% cut in spending this year and 6% to all agency budgets in fiscal 2021, and cutting the state's income tax rate for the second time in 3 years from 5.75% to 5.5%. So the session was suspended on March 16th due to the public health emergency. Before that suspension, however, the fiscal year 2021 budget, House Bill 793, was passed, as was House Bill 949, the flat income tax bill, reducing income tax rates to 5.375%, whether you're a millionaire or work a minimum wage bill. So fast forward, we're in the middle of an economic downturn projected to be more severe than the one in 2008, and major budget shortfalls are on the horizon. When the Georgia Assembly goes back into session, they'll be having to approve a budget. So what would your budget priorities be, if you could be specific? What gets cut? What will you fight for? And do you raise taxes, lower taxes, pass the flat tax? What would your budget priorities be?
All right. So first I want to say on the flat taxes are just anti-family. If you have kids, you're paying more under a flat tax scheme. But Georgia essentially already has one flat tax bracket. The top marginal tax rate is 7,000, which means basically everyone pays that, including that's for corporations. So that means Delta pays the same tax rate you do for the most part. And that's just, I mean, that's why we have a budget deficit. It's because we keep lowering taxes and we have not a progressive tax. If we just merely raise tax by 1 or 2% on only corporations, we could cover what will be projected to be about I think it's $1 billion deficit. But there are other ways we could cover that. I mean, there are lots of programs. First off, we spend more than that on detaining people. So so on our prison system. So, I mean, if we do something as simple as legalizing marijuana, we have about double the population of Colorado, and they make about $300 million for marijuana sales. So we'd make roughly double that, which would cover most of the deficit right there. And then we wouldn't be paying to keep people in prison, which is a waste of money, frankly. And they would be working, which means they would be paying income tax, which would cover even more. It's very simple. The only reason we have budget deficits is because it is designed that we have budget deficits. Now, if it really came to cutting programs, I mean, obviously things like imprisoning people for no reason would be at the top of my list to cut. But as far as what to save, we want to invest in things that are going to cause economic gains for working Georgians. So that means things like expanding MARTA. There'll be jobs in building tracks, and there will be new economic opportunities when you can commute into the city further, and when it takes you less time, and you can work more or
thank you, Asher.
Work better jobs.
Thumbs up.
Okay, Asher, thank you. Teri, what would your budget priorities be?
So to your question, especially about the tax cuts and tax policy, I voted against the tax cut in 2018 because the math didn't work. That tax cut was predicated on the assumption of a windfall that Georgia was supposed to have from the Trump tax cut. Those never materialized. So we knew from the beginning that by making that tax cut in 2018, we were going to be setting ourselves up to be in exactly the position we found ourselves in coming into the 2020 session. That was before we even had to deal with any of the economic repercussions of the pandemic. So I continue to impose that income tax decrease that is in the current budget that we'll be reconsidering when we go back later on this summer for the rest of the session. So again, prior to the session, I opposed these cuts. There was no way we could afford to even meet the most basic services in Georgia with the budget that was proposed and with the tax cuts that were proposed. We certainly wouldn't be able to increase teacher pay. We wouldn't be able to do a lot of things that we wanted to do. Now with the impact and what we know about the impact of the pandemic on the state's budget, there's no way I could in good conscience support any kind of a tax decrease. We need to get really comfortable with the fact that COVID-19 is changing everything we know about how we look at the budget and what we prioritize. And I think that the budget that the House passed even this past session in March is a fiction in so many ways. And so, again, I was elected in the Smyrna City Council at the start of the Great Recession. And during the recession, the city of Smyrna managed to avoid raising taxes. We avoided laying off any staff. We didn't furlough any city staff. We didn't make any significant cuts to city services. We were the only city in Metro Atlanta that did that. And so that gives me a really unique set of skills that I bring to the General Assembly as we prioritize our budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Teri. So we'll stick with you, Teri. The next question is regarding the economic recovery. So if you could please give us a broad brush outline of what Georgia's pandemic economic recovery program should look like.
Sure thing. So in addition to making sure that we consider that we have to give serious consideration to expanding Medicaid, because right now we are turning down millions and millions and millions of federal dollars that we should be getting if the leaders in our state weren't stubbornly resisting expanding Medicaid. We need to work to figure out how we can strengthen the reserve fund that Governor Deal built during his administration. That's the reason why we were able to, before we recessed the session, we were able to allocate $100 million for pandemic spending. We need to make sure that we consider the needs of working families and small businesses. And this also includes caregiving. I think caregiving is really under-recognized as an economic issue. Whether you're talking about caregiving for your children, childcare, that's a slow-moving tsunami that's coming towards us with how we deal with childcare, particularly this summer, because there aren't going to be any summer camps that are open. And a lot of childcare centers are not able to be at full capacity. It's caregiving for children, caregiving for parents, caregiving for any other relative you might have. Caregiving is a real and profound economic issue that we really haven't considered. And I think that that's something that we need to prioritize when we start to focus on what our post-pandemic economic recovery is going to look like.
Thank you. Asher? What would you like to see with an economic recovery program post-pandemic?
I mean, so if we want to recover from that, if we want the economy to recover, we need to invest in workers. I mean, so we need to take things away like tax cuts for Delta's fuel and to Hollywood to make movies here. We need to make sure that the people that are actually working are the ones benefiting from the program. We want to make sure that they get things, like better wage coverage. We want things like the Medicare expansion, and we want to cap copays, things that aren't hurting the working class people. But we want to make sure there are jobs provided. Like I touched on with expanding MARTA, there'll be lots of new construction jobs, new jobs running those, trains and buses that will be in the expansion. And in legalizing marijuana, there will be lots of jobs for that. We need to open up new jobs for people to work that aren't just the same old thing. And then we're throwing all the money at the corporations instead of the people. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Asher, the public health state of emergency in Georgia and nationwide has exposed many of the frailties, disparities, and inequities in our healthcare system. What healthcare policies do you feel need to be changed, especially in light of COVID-19 and Georgia's readiness?
Well, no one should have to pay to get tested, just right off the bat. Like, we need to make sure people are getting tested. We need to make sure they're accurate tests. And that's something we completely failed to do, that we've just been letting the government send it off to their cronies to make faulty tests. There's been little oversight over some of the tests that have been made. We need to make sure we're getting quality tests. That's the very first thing. Then we need to make sure people aren't paying for it, because if people can't afford to go get treated, they're just going to keep it and start spreading it to more people. And then we need to work on expanding Medicaid. We need to work on capping copays so that you have that reoccurring cost of like your insulin. You don't have to keep paying that. We need to make sure that people have actual choice and that things are covered by their healthcare. And that, when you get sick and you're in an emergency and you got to go to the hospital, you're going to have to tell them to go to the hospital that your insurance covers. And that's terrible. That should not be your thought when you're in an emergency or you're helping out someone else in an emergency. And so, it's just, the system is flawed. We need to work towards a much better system.
Thank you. And Teri, healthcare policies, what do we need to change here in Georgia?
Is this COVID specific or general?
Just in general, the public health state of emergency has sort of laid bare some of the weaknesses in the system. So what do we need to do moving forward?
Going back to Medicaid expansion, that's one of the biggest things we can do. I mean, we are leaving money on the table. That's money that's coming from the pockets of Georgians, going up to Washington, and it's not coming back to us. And we need this money. House District 42 has a staggeringly high rate of folks who are uninsured. It was close to 36, 37% in certain segments of the population, as high as 42% in some segments of the population. And that's data that's from way before the pandemic. So we know that those numbers are going to be even higher. It's considering that the wealth of healthcare options that we have in Cobb County, the WellStar Health System, there's a Minute Clinic on every corner. We have no shortage of doctors. This isn't like rural Georgia where you're limited by even an availability of healthcare providers. We have no shortage of healthcare providers. The problem is paying for it. And for so many people in this district, that is an issue that none of the policies we've done so far in the General Assembly have helped. But expanding Medicaid will 100% help people in this district get better access to healthcare.
Thank you. Switching over to gun safety, Teri, do you support universal background checks for all gun purchases, including those made privately by someone other than a federally licensed firearm dealer? And are there any other reforms related to gun safety and reducing gun violence that you would champion?
Yes, absolutely. I 100% support universal background checks for all gun purchases. I don't care where you buy it. If one thing we've learned is how much you can do with technology, how available it is, and how secure it is. And there's no reason why you couldn't have a background check for any kind of gun transaction. I'm proud to be endorsed by Moms Demand Action, and I agree with them that so much violence in our state can be prevented by shoring up our gun safety legislation. I don't support legislative efforts that make it easier and faster to obtain firearms. I believe we need to instead encourage responsible gun ownership. We need to close the legal loopholes that we have. Right now, it's simply too easy to buy, own, and carry guns in Georgia. I oppose permitless carry legislation, and I will vote no on any legislative efforts that would allow permitless carry. I support legislation like what my colleague Jen Jordan has had over in the Senate This would keep guns out of the hands of those accused of domestic violence. That's an issue for women, it's an issue for families, and frankly, it's an issue for law enforcement.
Thank you. Asher, would you support universal background checks on gun purchases? And are there any other reforms that you would champion to promote more gun safety and reducing gun violence?
So I've been on top of a lot of left gun advocacy groups, and because this really is our background system is kind of inefficient. It takes a long time. It doesn't really check in all the boxes you would think it would check, and it is actually hard to do it at, say, a gun show, because it is supposed to be a 2-day background check. You send it off, it gets done. So we need to expand the system, make sure there are deeper checks, but make sure that it is more flexible and people can actually use it in a way that would be practical. So you can go get your check and you'll have a certificate that's good for, say, a week. And then when you go to that gun show, you're already checked off and background checked and you're good to go. You can get guns. But we need to focus more on promoting safe ownership. So we need to do things like incentivize people to own gun safes and gun locks, because most gun violence is actually self-inflicted. It's for suicide. So we need to make sure that things like mental health care are taken care of. Guns really aren't, getting rid of guns isn't going to solve the problem if we don't address the root causes, which are the mental health care crisis and poverty. People committing violent crimes with guns, that's usually economically motivated. And if they have better opportunities, they won't be doing that. And if they have the healthcare that they need, they're not going to be shooting themselves or shooting others. If you just take away the guns, all you're going to be left with is people driving trucks and using bombs to perpetrate attacks, which is what they do in Europe, and the death tolls are the same.
Thank you. Moving on to private school vouchers. Asher, you're up first for this. Before the session was suspended, Senate Bill 386, proposing expanded eligibility of Georgia special needs scholarship to students who have educational accommodations or services under Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This bill would greatly expand the amount of public dollars going to private schools. It passed the Georgia Senate before suspension. So the Georgia House will take up the bill when it reconvenes. What would your position be on Senate Bill 386 specifically, and on private school vouchers in general?
So it would be no. I was a teacher. I worked at Wheeler High School here in Cobb County, which is a magnet school. And so how essentially a magnet school is it takes those public funds and it creates a public school within a school for advanced students. The problem with that is it was pretty segregated. There were people that were in district and could go to the school, and there were people that had to apply. And the people that were in district would mostly just take the non-magnet classes. Not a whole lot of them took advantage of the magnet classes, but the people who were getting the magnet classes were being driven by their parents. So they had an advantage in that their parents could afford to drive them every day to that nice school. So if we create private schools, that's just schools for the privileged and the rich. There's no way that someone who has economic hardship can drive their kid every day to a school. And that's all you're doing. You're just taking money from all the students and giving it to the rich students by creating a private school specifically for them. No matter how you structure it, you're always going to end up with a system where this is the case. So it's just better to make sure that each kid gets the best funding they possibly can.
Thank you. Teri, the Georgia House will take up Senate Bill 386, expanding Georgia special needs scholarships when it reconvenes. So what would your position be on this bill specifically, and on private school vouchers in general?
Thanks, Jackie. I'd be the first person to tell you we need to do a lot more for special needs students in Georgia. But Senate Bill 386 is not the solution to this issue. We need to be extraordinarily careful and thoughtful to ensure that public education funds are designated for public schools only, and that we increase the amount we currently spend in our public schools. Our students deserve the quality resources and opportunities, the best that we can give them, and our teachers deserve a salary that reflects their incredible commitment. If you've been teaching your kids at home during the pandemic, you know profoundly clearly how important it is. I'm endorsed by the Georgia Association of Educators. That's something that I'm also very proud of. And I'll tell you, 386, it hasn't even gotten a committee hearing with the House Education Committee. The fact that even the GOP-led House Education Committee isn't interested in hearing more about this bill should tell you how egregious it is. It is straight up a voucher bill. And it's not something that I can support. There's a lot we need to do for special needs. We need to do one with one-on-one. We need to do more with ABA. We need to do more to make sure that every child in Georgia has access to whatever resources they need so they can succeed in our public schools. But this is not the solution.
Thank you. Moving on to House Bill 994. So Governor Brian Kemp unveiled legislation aimed at toughening Georgia's anti-gang laws by lengthening prison sentences, extending the reach of law enforcement agencies across county lines, and adding the death penalty as an option for gang-related murder convictions. So House Bill 994 passed the Georgia House over the objection of Democrats. Does Georgia need tougher anti-gang laws? Please explain. Teri?
Yes, I voted against that bill, the governor's anti-gang bill. It dismantled so much of the criminal justice reforms that we worked for years to get in place in Georgia, even under the Deal administration. This bill would push more juvenile offenders into the adult court and incarceration system. This is not a bill that I can support, and it's not a bill that would actually help Georgians. It's a bill that folks put together because they could say that they were doing something to fight gangs, but it doesn't actually do anything to address the realities of why gangs exist, how children are often conscripted into these gangs. It's a bad bill, and I oppose it. In terms of cash bail, that's a regressive system. It's an undue burden for the poor, especially for communities of color. It's fiscally irresponsible for governments to pay to incarcerate nonviolent offenders while they wait for their court date, while those that happen to be able to get the money together can wait for their court date at home.
Okay, thank you. Asher, do we need tougher anti-gang laws in Georgia? Please explain.
No, we don't. As far as anti-gang laws are just code word for racism. Like, it's just to lock up minorities. That's the whole point of it. That's why they're tougher sentencing. It's just to crack down on that. We absolutely don't need them. Like, we need to focus on why people are joining gangs, and it's economic reasons. People are joining gangs because that is the only path they see that is. And when we send people to jail for longer, that just means they're getting. The longer they spend in jail, the less ready they're going to be to have an actual job when they get out. We're not preparing people to get jobs by sending them to jail. Georgia's prison system is not about rehabilitation. It's about punishment. And then once they're punished, we don't really care what happens to them afterwards. And that's what we really need to focus on, what happens afterwards, what we can do to prevent it, making sure there's real opportunities for people. And when we send them to prison, every dime we're spending to keep someone in jail is a dime we could have been spent on educating them and training them for a successful life.
Thank you. Since the incident has come to light, the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery, there's been renewed interest in hate crime laws. So Georgia is one of the 4 states in the nation without a hate crime law on the books. A hate crime bill passed the Georgia House last year by a 96-64 vote, but it stalled in the state Senate. So it was held up by critics who say they're skeptical about the need for additional penalties for crimes that already carry hefty sentences. So Asher, does Georgia need to pass a hate crime law? If so, why? If not, why not?
We need hate crime laws because a crime that you commit because someone's Black or because they're part of the LGBT community is not the same as just any ordinary crime, just the same way that premeditated murder is different than manslaughter. There are different crimes and they deserve to be handled differently. But it's more important that we go beyond that because a hate crime law is really just a band-aid. If there's no one in place or no good system to enforce that law is effectively useless. So we need to make sure we have good systems where there are transparent standards for when something is a hate crime and that it has to be considered a hate crime when it fulfills those requirements. We need to make sure that then the cops pursuing those crimes and the DAs prosecuting those crimes are willing to enforce those laws as hate crimes. So we need a way that citizens will have oversight over their DAs and their police officers through citizen recall to make sure that only good officers that are serving the best interests of the public are serving the public.
Thank you. Teri, does Georgia need to pass a hate crime law? If so, why? If not, why not?
Yes, we do. I voted for House Bill 426 when it was in the House. It's over in the Senate now, and it has actually even bipartisan support, which is long overdue. And it's the tragedy of the fact that this has bipartisan support is that it took the murder of Ahmaud Arbery to get to where we had an outcry even from the governor on that. So we need to pass this bill, and it needs to be one of the key things that we do when we go back into the session in June. In addition to protecting Georgians from discrimination with employment, housing, public accommodations, we don't have those on the books either. We're one out of only 4 states in the country that doesn't have this bill on the books. This is an easy thing to do. It is the right thing to do. And we need to make sure this happens. You know, I've been working with groups from different communities for a while. I'm endorsed by the Stonewall Democrats. This is an organization of LGBTQ Democrats and individuals and allies who fight for equality and safety in Georgia's communities. I've worked with Georgia Equality for a long time. It's been important to me for my entire time in office here and in the city, on the city council, when Smyrna was one of the only cities in Georgia to offer same-sex health benefits for partners of city employees. This is an important thing, and we have got to get this hate crime bill passed.
Thank you. And so, Teri, you've sort of touched on another question, which is are additional anti-discrimination laws needed to protect people from discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations? Do you have anything more to say on that, or should I throw this back over to Asher for his response?
No, I really do. You know, we have been, whether it's in terms of healthcare, whether it's in terms of access to healthcare, it's our dismal maternal mortality rate that we have here in Georgia. There is a lot more that we need to do in terms of ensuring that we have equality for everyone in Georgia. I mean, part of that comes from funding. That's going to be a real problem going into this budget, but those are the tough budget decisions that we need to be making so that we can be sure that everyone has an equal chance in the state of Georgia, and whether it has to do with their education, their health care, their economic opportunities, housing, that's an issue we really haven't even touched on yet, but yes, that's something we need to prioritize.
Okay, thank you. Asher, your views on whether we need additional anti-discrimination laws in the state of Georgia? Well,
we definitely do. I mean, gender identity is not a protected category under Georgia law, so just right there we need that. But the protection laws are important because, I mean, they cover things like housing and jobs, and I don't know anyone that can live without housing and a job. So it's crazy to me that we've invented this system where an HR manager can just say you're not a good culture fit, and you know what that's code for, and you can't do anything about it. So we need to make a system where there are, again, transparent standards, so we know when you don't get a job, you know, they can tell you, well, we had a candidate, here were his qualifications, this is why they beat you out. You need some kind of feedback, so it's not just, oh, you didn't fit for some reason. And we need to make sure that these standards are transparent, that they can, you know, and that they're actionable. So a lot of times people think something happened and they just don't have the resources to pursue it, or they just feel like completely disowned by the system and they don't feel like the system will do anything about it. So we need, there's a lot of legal costs associated with, like, if you did want to sue someone over a discrimination case, that's a lot of burden of proof on the person that has been discriminated against to show that they've been discriminated against. And that's just, we have a system set up so that discriminators can get away with it if they just use the right kind of couched language. And that's completely abominable, and we need to correct that.
Okay, thank you. So one thing that's not on the ballot in June or November is redistricting, but we all know that after the census is complete, this will be a major function or task, charge for the Georgia Assembly. We will be redistricting here in Georgia. So the Georgia legislature will be charged with this redistricting. In your opinion, how should the redistricting process be structured? And what, if any, reforms in the process would you support?
This is to me, right?
Yes, that's
okay, so with redistricting, this is actually a pretty simple data science problem. It's something that I've actually researched into. So there's a couple ways you can go about it, but ideally you want a system that's going to create the least number of wasted votes and have the greatest amount of representation. So wasted votes are basically when someone wins by 51%. That means 49% of those people aren't being represented. And you can basically just solve this problem with a pretty simple algorithm. We don't need humans to be involved. We don't need to have this debate every 10 years. The reason we have this debate every 10 years is because redistricting has just been a tool for establishment politicians to deny people votes. So we really just need to throw out their whole system that they're using even. Like we could solve the redistricting problem, but it's still institutional problems beyond that. Like we could embrace multi-member districts and proportional ranked voting so people's voices are actually being heard. So there's actual choice. The idea that we should redistrict every 10 years is just insane. It's just them trying to deny certain people votes because they decide those people aren't going to vote for them. And it's completely terrible. It's politicians choosing their voters, not voters choosing their politicians.
Thank you. And Teri, what sort of reforms do we need with the redistricting process?
So, right, that is a big thing that we're going to be doing in the House, and I believe in nonpartisan redistricting. I support the establishment of an independent, nonpartisan redistricting commission in Georgia. Our districts, whether they're for our school board, our city council, the state house, Congress, they should be snapshots of the communities that they'll represent. Gerrymandering is only ever done in the interest of keeping one party in power, and it is never in the best interest of residents and stakeholders in that district. When I was on the city council, I was on the committee that helped draw the current city council districts. This was after the 2010 census. And one of the major things that was different then that we also don't have now is the Voting Rights Act. Georgia is no longer subject to making sure that we get VRA approval for these districts. So that's going to change how things work too, which makes it even more important than ever that instead of having whichever party is in charge draw the maps, I'd love for it to be the Democrats, but whichever party in charge drawing the maps needs to be doing this with the guidance of the Independent Redistricting Council. And I really, that's something that I think is very important for how we move forward as Georgians and how we make forward that everyone is actually represented and that their voices do count.
Thank you. So that's the last of our Q&A for the evening. We'll move into closing statements and we'll go in reverse ballot order. So we'll start with you, Asher. You have 2 minutes.
All right. It's pretty simple. I'm really running so that we can have a better system. I think the system that we're currently trapped inside of causes most of our issues. And if we, as voters, can work towards a new and better system, getting rid of the old, putting in something new that actually works, will represent us, that's transparent. I mean, we don't have simple things like ballot initiatives. Like you can't start a ballot initiative to get something voted on in the state. We've been systematically stripped of any voice in our democracy. And I'm someone who wants to fight to get that change so that there will be good politicians, good policy, good jobs for people in this district, especially the working class. So often does our government serve the interest of the big corporations and the big lobbies. And it really casts aside those people that have been marginalized. And I really want to fight for those people, make sure their voice is heard, make sure we have a true democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Asher. Teri, your concluding statement?
Yes. Jackie, thanks again, Matt, to the Cobb Democrats for inviting me tonight and for sponsoring the forum. I know this community. I love this community. HD 42 is my home. It's where I've raised a family, and it's where I've dedicated myself to serving this district and working to improve our quality of life. We have come a long way in this area since I've served on the city council, but we have so much work to do in Georgia. The issues of affordable housing and access to healthcare in Cobb County, they're only going to grow in concern over the next few years. In addition to the endorsements I've mentioned so far, I'm also endorsed by groups like the Sierra Club, NARAL Pro-Choice Georgia, the Georgia AFL-CIO, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, Vote Pro-Choice, the Georgia Association of Educators. I have a solid record of legislative wins that help our community. This includes sponsoring and co-sponsoring bills that establish the ATL and found ways to better fund transit in Metro Atlanta and to bring better transit to Cobb County. I've sponsored and co-sponsored legislation that prohibits the shackling of incarcerated women in Georgia. Women who are giving birth in Georgia who are incarcerated no longer are required to be shackled. They cannot be shackled. I've sponsored bills that would increase the vaccination rate in Georgia, bills that would give more affordable housing choices to low-wage earners in Georgia, and I've co-sponsored legislation that would eliminate the sales tax on menstrual products. I've fought for choice for women in Georgia, and I have fought to expand Medicaid in Georgia. I'm a data-driven decision maker. I think that the Georgia response we've had to COVID-19 so far makes it incredibly clear how important it is to make decisions that are based on data and based on science and based on facts and not based on our feelings or who we want to succeed and who we don't want to succeed. It's no secret that HD 42 is a bright blue district, and I believe that our community deserves a true Democrat to represent them in the General Assembly. Representing you in the Georgia House of Representatives isn't something I ever viewed as a stepping stone to higher office or as a plan B. You can visit my website, teriforgeorgia.com, to learn more about my campaign and learn more about me. And I'm always available if you want to contact me, 404-931-8374, or shoot me an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Teri. So that concludes our virtual town hall for Georgia House District 42. Thank you, Teri Anulewicz and Asher Nuckolls, for joining us tonight. A few parting words. It's not too late to apply for an absentee ballot and vote from the safety and comfort of your home. Do not delay. Apply today. See cobbdemocrats.org for more information. There are now 4 drop boxes located within Cobb County, making it even easier to vote absentee. You can drop your ballot into any drop box, contact-free, COVID-free, postage-free, as late as 7 p.m. on Election Day. What could be more convenient? So be sure to take a look at the webpage, cobbdemocrats.org, for more information. You can download forms and find the locations of those drop boxes, as well as in-person early vote information. So thank you all again for joining us online tonight. Stay safe, stay healthy. Have a great night. Thank you.